So now you've collected your data and you're probably wondering what to do with it. Well, you've downloaded it from Qualtrics as an SPSS file. As graduate students, you have access to SPSS not only in your graduate student offices, but also the availability of purchasing a license through the university at a student discounted rate. When you get the data file, this is how it will appear, or virtually how it will appear, depending on the nature of the questions in the survey and how they're organized when you're in variable view. You can also view them in data view by clicking on this bottom tab here and then scrolling along the bottom so you can actually see the individual values provided by the participants in your study. But when we go back to variable view, you can do several things right off the bat. So in understanding your data, you're going to want to inspect it, understand its properties so that you can properly report it both descriptively and in terms of your analysis. Some quick tools that will come in handy, especially when you're talking about looking at descriptive statistics, exist right here on the top of your toolbar within SPSS. So here, for example, let's say I have a variable, this item right here, and I want to know all of the properties of this particular variable. Well, by clicking on that row, or this one for that example, I can select that and then go to this icon right here. And what will happen is that I will know everything about that variable in terms of the number of participants who responded to that item, the average score, the mean, and the standard deviation, which is the measure of dispersion that you're interested in when you're looking at continuous or ratio level data. Now, several other functions you'll be interested in doing. Obviously, with our type of research, we tend to use multi-item sets in order to form scales. So you may ask 3 or 4 questions in your survey that are going to comprise a single variable for your subsequent analysis. Before you can perform analysis, however, you need to know things about the internal consistency of that scale, and that involves assessing reliability. So let's say I have a multi-item scale that involves these 4 items. Q58.2, and this is again just the format that they come from Qualtrics. You can actually customize that, and we'll discuss this some in class, as in the way that the data set is going to be organized based on how you label your variables. If I want to know if this forms a internally consistent set of items, or maybe I'll use Q59 1 through 3, I can go to Analyze, go to Scale, Reliability Analysis, and then you can choose how the variables are displayed. Here you're actually seeing the full name of the items in this particular data set. But you can also go to this, if you have a mouse, you simply right click and it'll show variable names instead, which is a little bit more parsimonious, especially if you end up renaming them in your own data file. And so I know that this set of items was supposed to be interrelated, and let's say that I want to know whether they form an internally consistent scale. Now the defaults on SPSS don't really have anything selected, so what you're going to want to do is select the following items. You want to know your descriptive statistics for each item in your scale, the scale as a whole, and what would happen if you were to remove an item. The reason this is important is because sometimes you have low performing scales that can be improved by removing one of the items. It's also helpful to know the means and your variances, just because remember we have to eventually report the actual scale statistics in our papers, and that will give you that information. And then I always select the intraclass correlation coefficient. This just allows me to see how interrelated each item is with the scale itself. From there you'll select Continue and go to OK. From this, what we're interested in looking at is this value right here, which is Cronbach's alpha. And that is showing that our internal consistency is a score of 0.92, which is well above the threshold for being an internally consistent scale. As you know from your readings, typically any value above 0.80 is considered to be acceptable. We can also inspect the individual items, so we can see that the scores in terms of like the means and standard deviations are fairly similar across all of the items. You know, some are lower than the extremities, and then also you have extremities. But by and large, we're looking at the midpoint of around 2.5 being our median for each value. And this is based on 5 items. Here we can see what would happen if we were to remove any particular item. So let's say I remove the first item in the scale. It would give me an alpha of 0.903. Now obviously this is a reduction in the reliability because the original scale is 0.915. So this shows here that any one of these items, if removed, would actually reduce the overall internal consistency of the scale. So we want to keep that. That means that each of these items is actually interrelated in a way that they strengthen the overall reliability of your scale. So this concludes the first tutorial of how to look at just basic descriptive statistics and how to look at whether items that in a scale are internally consistent. In the next tutorial, we'll look at how to combine items to actually create a scale from these items and then how to use them in subsequent analysis.